Number 1 question. What happens in a chemical reaction? In a chemical reaction, they are breaking down chemical bonds between reactant molecules, particles, and forming new bonds between atoms in product particles or molecules. And the number of atoms before and after the chemical change is the same, but the number of molecules will change. In this chemical reaction, molecules must collide with the correct orientation. When the chemical change happens, the chemical substance identity changes. An example of this is rusting. When an iron nail comes into contact with water and is then exposed to the air, it's rust, forming a brown-red substance. This process changes the chemical composition of the original substance. Lastly, there are 5 conditions that happen during a chemical reaction. We have color change, formation of a precipitate, formation of a gas, color change, and temperature change. And that's what happened during a chemical reaction. Number 2 question. What are some differences between RNA and DNA? There are many differences between RNA and DNA. RNA is known as ribonucleic acid and DNA is also known as deoxyribonucleic acid. First is in structure. DNA is usually double-stranded like this one. And the RNA is single-stranded most of the time like this one. Second is in size. DNA is much larger than RNA with millions of nucleotides. RNA is small with hundreds to thousands of nucleotides. Next is in sugar structure. DNA has a deoxyribosugar, that's why it's called deoxyribonucleic acid. It also has a phosphate group and nitrogenous base and carbon with oxygen missing. In the other hand, RNA has a ribose sugar with also having phosphate group and nitrogenous base. And the carbon here are having oxygen attached to it. Number 4 is in its location. DNA is located primarily in the nucleus, and the RNA is primarily outside the nucleus in the cytosol and ribosomes. Number 5 is in its nitrogenous bases. DNA has 4 bases, adenine A, guanine G, cytosine C, and thymine T. And RNA also have 4 bases, adenine A, guanine G, cytosine C, and uracil. Number 3 question. Why does DNA replicate? Because DNA replication is a process by which a double-stranded DNA molecule is copied to produce 2 identical DNA molecules. And because replication is an essential process, because whenever a cell divides, the 2 new daughter cells must contain the same genetic information or DNA as the parent cell. DNA needs to replicate before cell divides so that each daughter cell will have the same and equal number of chromosomes. Each cell needs a full instruction manual to operate properly. So, the DNA needs to replicate before cell's division so that each new cell will receive a full set instruction. So, that's why DNA replicates. Number 4 question. Why did Gregor Mendel choose pea plants as his experimental organism? Gregor Mendel is known as the father of modern genetics because of genetic experiments with pea or Pisum sativum. And in order to study genetics, Mendel chose to work with pea plants because they have easily identifiable traits. For example, pea plants are either tall or short, which is an easy trait to observe. Mendel also chose pea plants as his experimental organism because it can either self-pollinate or be cross-pollinated. There are many reasons for the selection of pea plants for the genetic experiment of Mendel. This is because pea plants are easy to grow in the garden. The flowers of pea plants are hermaphrodite. Flowers have bisexual traits. And it is easy to obtain pure breed plant. And through self-fertilization, the generation time of pea plants are less. They have excellent disease resistance and have an optimal rate of survival. Lastly, Gregor Mendel chose pea plants as his experimental organism because in this, he can learn how characteristics are passed from parents to offspring.